千里之行，始于足下。A journey of 1,000 miles begins beneath the feet. We now gather in the Tao to travel the journey together. Welcome to Tao Talks with Derek Lin, where we take a deep dive into the Tao Te Ching by Laozi. I would like to extend a warm welcome to you. Thank you for joining us. I would like to invite you to center your thoughts and direct your attention to this moment in time, to the here and now, to be fully present and mindfully aware as we all ready ourselves for this sacred process in the Tao with one another. We begin, as always, with the chapter title, Empty Center. So the three characters that you see there, so they're read left to right. The first one, 虚, empty or emptiness. The second character, 中, middle or center. Last character there, 章, chapter. So literally, this is the empty center chapter. So the straightforward transliteration that maps the original verbatim is actually a usable translation. The emptiness of the Tao is the central theme of this chapter. When we talk about center, we're pointing to the core of your being. Now, we all have an intuitive understanding of what that is. So when we feel unsettled, confused, or distracted, we sense a need to center ourselves. Indeed, the masters of all the great traditions of the world have always taught that in order for any of us to connect with spirituality, it is absolutely necessary to find one's center within and empty one's mind of extraneous thoughts. Those of you who have tried meditation, you already know the process of centering is key to entering into that meditative state. And it is also why these two characters, empty and center, they are inextricably connected to the Tao. It makes perfect sense that Laozi would devote a verse to these two characters. Now, let me also explore specifically the center of your being, the center of a human being. You may say, well, the center of my being is my spirit or my soul. Okay, that's good. There are different names for that I just want to mention so everybody's on the same page. In the Zen tradition, the center of one's being is self-nature. In the Tao, we can call it the true self. Regardless of what we call it, the center of yourself is that singular point of view that never changes, no matter what. You can change your name as many times as you like, but you're still you. Your body goes through changes. You age, but you're still you. The essence of the center is empty, just like the Tao. Because the Tao is you, and you are the Tao. Those who have studied Buddhist philosophy will even say this self doesn't exist. Words cannot adequately describe this center nor its emptiness. And that is why Laozi uses multiple metaphors in this chapter to help us get a clearer understanding. That's what we're going to explore. let's take a look at the chapter itself. Tao Te Ching 11. 30 spokes join in one hub. In its emptiness, there is the function of a vehicle. Mix clay to create a container. In its emptiness, there is the function of a container. Cut open doors and windows to create a room. In its emptiness, there is the function of a room. Therefore, that which exists is used to create benefit. That which is empty is used to create functionality. Okay, that's the chapter there. Now, as always, I want to look over the Chinese characters to see if I can pick out the ones that repeat themselves from one line to the next. So even if you don't know Chinese, just visually you can pick out the ones that repeat. Let me highlight what I see. So those 3 characters that are the beginning of line 2, 4, and 6, they're all the same. They're all translated the same way, in its emptiness. Now, is there more repetition? Well, of course. Other characters from the same 3 lines, 2, 4, and 6, also repeat. Let me highlight them. You can probably see them even before I do the highlighting, but here they are. So you can now see that these 3 lines, 2, 4, and 6, they're mostly the same, except for one character. And I've highlighted, there is the function of in the translation to the right-hand side. And now you can just through logic figure out what those characters are. So the one character that's not repeating is vehicle. And in line 4, that character is container. And in line 6, it's room. Now, of course, when doing translations, you can pick and choose different characters as long as they convey the same meaning. Instead of vehicle, you may use like carriage or chariot. Those are vehicles too. Instead of container, it may be vessel for containing things. That's valid too. Anyhow, you can see that there are no further repetitions in that same way anywhere else. Therefore, we can confidently draw a line between 6 and 7, and we can say that, hey, look, from 1 to 6, we have the top half of the chapter, and then 7 and 8, the bottom 2 lines, they are the other section. Now, because we're now seeing a pattern of 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 in the form of A, B, A, B, A, B, we can also bring in a couple of shorter lines to denote the fact that these are matching constructions poetically. These are couplets, 3 couplets for 6 lines. So that is the structure of Tao Te Ching 11. Let us delve right into the first line of the chapter. Line 1 says, 30 spokes join in one hub. Let me bring out the first 2 characters to focus on them. 30. So these 2 characters literally are 3 and 10. However, you wouldn't want to translate them as 310. Literally, they mean 30. That's how 30 is written. 310. Like 30 when you write it out, like with digits. So this line describes a carriage wheel without stating it explicitly. Such a wheel was common in ancient times. During the warring stage period, such wheels were everywhere because chariots were used for transportation. The reason why it is not stated explicitly is because Lao Tzu did not feel that would be necessary. The wheel was so commonplace that everyone would immediately be able to get the reference. This is overall true in the Tao tradition. Since ancient times, Tao sages have always favored metaphors that everyday people could easily connect with, relate to, or grasp in their minds. Let's continue. So for this line, 30 spokes join in one hub. What it's saying is that each of the 30 spokes plays a supporting role. Each represents substance, an equal part in contribution to the structure of the wheel. Now, we've seen this kind of wheels before quite often, so we can immediately understand that Lao Tzu is basically saying that all of these spokes, they are what keeps the wheel a wheel. Now, they join together in one hub. The hub is central to the wheel, and therefore it is the most important. And when sages look at this pattern, when you and I look at a wheel, we see the spokes and we see the hub, and oh yeah, that's a wheel. Sages will tend to look at the same thing and come up with reflections on life, on general principles, on the Tao itself. So when they look at the same thing, they see a recurring pattern in life. So some examples to illustrate what I mean by recurring pattern. As one example, the ancient Chinese Empire could be visualized as having the central role being the emperor of the ancient Chinese Empire. So the hub of the emperor will be surrounded by the spokes of ministers who contribute to imperial governance. It doesn't have to be anything as large scale as an empire. It can be something that's immediate to you and me. So think about an extended family, your family, the family of your relatives, and so on. The extended family can be visualized as having the home of the grandparents in the middle, and the spokes radiating outward would be the families of their adult children. So that is very easy to see. In a similar way, you can also visualize your own life. You can think about the wheel of your life with yourself as the hub. You're in the middle, you're playing the central role. And you're connected to various people in your life, and those are the spokes of the wheel. So I think that's pretty easy to understand. Let's go to line 2. Line 2 says, in its emptiness, there is the function of a vehicle. So now I want to single out the character for emptiness, 无. The meaning is to not have something, to be without, a lack, non-existence, empty or emptiness. So now we can see the hub represents emptiness, just as the spokes represent substance. So this is actually nothing more than Lao Tzu making the point of emptiness versus substance. In this case, the emptiness is where the axle of the carriage goes through. As we all know, that's how wheels work. And that takes us to the next line, to be considered as an entire line. In its emptiness, there's the function of a vehicle. So here's the point. If some of the spokes are broken, it is possible that the wheel can still function with reduced effectiveness. And you can visualize this in yourself, that you've got a wheel with many spokes. Maybe you've got one that's broken, but you can still hobble along. You can still make forward progress. On the other hand, if you've got damage in the hub, in the center, to the point where it can no longer be a hub, that is, it cannot hold the axle, then you have a situation where, of course, the chariot goes nowhere. It doesn't have that wheel. The whole wheel is missing in action. This is why we'll say the hub is crucial to the carriage. What I mean by crucial, previously, in the previous slide, I say that it's the most important. Now what I'm saying is that it's not just the most important, but it is essential in the sense that the object, the wheel, cannot work, cannot function without it. As a general principle, emptiness is always crucial for the intended function of anything. Crucial. So let me go to emptiness and extending out from what Lao Tzu said to what he implied. We start with the wooden chariot wheel. What we have seen, what Lao Tzu says, support of the spokes all around the central hub. The emptiness of the hub is what allows the function of the chariot as the axle runs right through it. This is what's in the chapter. Now let's extend on it. Let's figure out what Lao Tzu is trying to express. Tao sages never say anything literally. They always want to make a particular point. So now we go to the ancient empire. In the empire, we have the advice of the ministers as the spokes. We have the wise emperor as the hub, and we have the governance of the empire as the axle. So just like the hub must be empty for the axle to fit through, the wise emperor must also be empty in a specific way. The emperor must be empty of egocentric notions, the idea that he alone knows best. In other words, he must be receptive to the counsel of his ministers, his advisors. This is the emptiness that permits the axle of imperial governance to run through and take effect throughout the empire. Now, what's on the right-hand side of this slide? We already know, ultimately, Lao Tzu is always addressing you, and not just kings and emperors. Everybody, you and me. So it has to always come back to the life we live. So what does the wheel say about that? Well, first of all, what are the spokes in our lives? What are the support systems that we lean on for strength so we can do what we have to do from one day to the next? One easy answer to this question is, well, I've got my loved ones, family, friends. They help us hold it together, just like the spokes holding a wheel together. Aside from them, there's people in general. The ones we work with, the neighbors, the acquaintances, not people that we know well enough to call friends, but people that we must deal with on a daily basis. They're not in the circle of loved ones, but they nevertheless contribute to something in our lives. So I think that makes sense. So as you are thinking about your own life, I believe this is pretty easy to see that you are in the middle. I labeled it the humble cultivator, and I hope that applies to you, to every one of us. You, as the main character of your life, you're surrounded by a cast of supporting characters, each of whom is a spoke in the wheel of your life. Of course, to each one of them, they have their own wheel. In that wheel belonging to someone else, they are the central hub, and you are one of the spokes. I think we all get that. Now, in this metaphor, what is the emptiness that has to be in your heart? Just like the wise emperor must be empty of arrogance, the same is true for you. So that's why I put the label there, the humble cultivator. Lao Tzu is basically asking you this crucial question. Do you wish to exert your sovereign power over your life, like the emperor over his empire? If so, you've got to be like the hub that has the emptiness to permit the axle to fit. You must possess the humility within your heart to permit the axle of the Tao to fit through in your life. That is how the wheel can turn. That is how you move forward with your life. The Tao that runs through everything. Now we can see the wheel is a powerful symbol of the Tao. Now, the wheel symbol is prominent in other areas of Eastern thought as well, not just in the Tao. So I want to zoom out for an overview to really get the big picture. The wheel symbol. I want to start out with one particular wheel that are familiar to people who have studied Eastern thought, Eastern philosophies, or perhaps Buddhism. Here you see the wheel of samsara, 轮回. Well, what is that? Samsara is all about life and death. The wheel of samsara is more conceptual than visual. It has been depicted in several different ways, including very colorful renditions with elements of mythological and religious origins. Now, here I have chosen a relatively simple representation for clarity in highlighting the most important points. So the bullet points next to it, you're going to see the wheel of death and rebirth. Oftentimes, people say it is the wheel of birth, death, and rebirth. So they put in 3 elements there. And it seems to be divided into 3 parts: birth, death, and rebirth. Now, the common belief in Buddhism is that we have all lived many times before. So your birth was a rebirth. For the most part, every birth for everyone you know is a rebirth. So I simplify it to the wheel of death and rebirth. And if you like, you can call it the wheel of rebirth and death. It doesn't matter the order that you put in the elements. Now, this particular depiction, you can see, has 8 spokes in this particular wheel. And that's because I have divided the stages of life and death into 3 parts. Each spoke of the wheel represents 1 part. We'll get to those parts in just a moment. For now, I want to say that in Buddhism, this is the wheel where sentient beings are trapped. It is also the wheel where you go through a life that invariably has the elements of dukkha, which is suffering. So we're caught in this never-ending cycle, and the Buddha taught that the only way to be liberated from samsara is through spiritual enlightenment. Now, what are the 8 elements in this particular depiction? Here they are. Rebirth, and you can think of it as being at the very top. And upon being born, you go through infancy. That was the babyhood that you don't recall. Then there's childhood, and most of us recall elements from our childhood. At some point, adulthood, you pass through your teens, you become an adult. And as you grow and live your life, you get into middle age. Middle age transitions to old age. It's inevitable. And at some point, death. Following death, there's the afterlife. And then the cycle begins anew with rebirth, connecting back to the origin again. Now, in this particular conception, souls move around this wheel, so there's motion. Of course, from the perspective of the soul, it is a wheel that seems to be moving. Just like we feel like the same person, but the years pass us by, taking us from young age to old age. Or sort of like you stand outside, you think you're not moving, but then you know the earth is moving. So that is the wheel of samsara, coming from Eastern sources, and this is well known in Buddhism, Hinduism, etc. Let me also zero in on Buddhism itself. The most prominent primary symbol of Buddhism is the wheel of Dharma, 法轮. It is also called Dharma chakra. Chakra is wheel. So literally Dharma chakra is Dharma wheel. And the bullet points that you see there, the 3 jewels, I want to draw your attention to the very center part of the wheel, where you see the circle of 3 parts, right in the middle, right in the center. Those specifically represent the 3 jewels of Buddhism: the Buddha, the Dharma, and the Sangha. The Buddha was the originator of Buddhism from 2,500 years ago, roughly around the same time as Lao Tzu. Dharma, translated as law, but it's just the dharmic teachings of the Buddha, what the Buddha taught. Sangha is the community. It literally means monks. So the people who practice Buddhism, those who are ordained as monks, and the community of people who support them. That's Sangha. Those are the 3 jewels of Buddhism. And because of the central elements, the overall wheel is often seen as symbolizing the Buddha or his teachings or both. And when they talk about this wheel, Buddhists will specifically refer to Buddha's first sermon in the forest at Sarnath, where it is said he set the wheel of Dharma in motion, this wheel. Some Buddhist teachers today will also describe this wheel as being like the wheel navigating a ship. The ship's wheel for the ship's captain or navigator to control the direction of the ship. And that's important. It is important because there is the very common metaphor that life is like the ocean of bitterness. Life is so full of suffering that most people, ignorant of the teachings of the Buddha, are still immersed in this 苦海, in the ocean of bitterness. The teachings of the Buddha is like a ship or a boat that is sailing through. And when you are in the boat, you no longer need to be immersed in the ocean of suffering. Therefore, for someone of the Buddhist faith to convey those teachings to others, to bring them into the same understanding, it is said that they are ferrying a lost soul. They are literally dragging a sentient being from the ocean of suffering into the boat of deliverance. So that's why the ship's wheel becomes a way to talk about the symbol, the wheel of Dharma. And it does kind of look like the wheel on a ship. And lastly, the 8 spokes of this wheel correspond to the Noble Eightfold Path. And of course, I presented the Wheel of Dharma with 8 parts as another close correspondence. Now, what are the Eightfold Path? What are the elements? What are the spokes exactly? They are right view, right resolve, right speech, right actions, right livelihood, right effort, right mindfulness, and right concentration. So that's a lot. And let me expand out to explain what they are. When we say right view, the first of the Noble Eightfold Path, it is the proper understanding of life. It is seeing life correctly, and that is why it is called right view. And we're just skimming the surface in terms of meaning. Each one of these can have multiple layers of meaning. Number 2, right resolve, resolution to follow the path, specifically the path of Buddhist teachings. It's the correct resolve, the intention to follow the path without straying. So it sounds a little bit like what we have gone through that we studied in the previous chapter of the Tao Te Ching. Number 3 is right speech. No lying, no rudeness. So for someone to follow the Noble Eightfold Path, it is careful. They speak with care. They watch what they say. They want to avoid saying anything that can be misleading. They don't want to obscure the truth or facts, and they don't want to damage relationships through what they say. That's right speech. Then we have right action, and sometimes known as right conduct, which is an action, and that just means no harming others or killing others, no taking something by force or stealing something. These are all within the realm of wrongful actions and not right action or right conduct. Number 5 is right livelihood. That is to say, the work that you do in life, it has to be consistent with what you believe. So for as a quick example, there have been people who started out as working as butchers who, upon learning about the Buddha's teachings, decide to change careers to do something else with their lives. Number 6 is right effort. So right effort is to improve yourself, to put the effort into making yourself a more refined spiritual being. Number 7, right mindfulness. That's present moment awareness, to be mindful of what is happening now and to be mindful of the teachings that are beneficial to your path. To be aware, to be consciously aware, not be absent-minded, to know what you're doing at any particular time. That's right mindfulness. Lastly, right concentration. This is all about the meditative practice It's the concentration that takes you into the stages of meditation, and this is something that multiple traditions in Buddhism really focus on, especially the ones that have a heavy emphasis on the meditative practice. It's the concentration of the mind supplemented by meditation to derive insights. So that is the Noble Eightfold Path that correspond to the 8 spokes of the wheel in the wheel of Dharma. So that's the overview on Eastern thoughts that most people may be exposed to. Now, I want to talk about the things that are much more obscure, namely what we've been talking about. The Tao is still not well known at all in the West or in the world in general. In this particular chapter, we have talked about the wheel as a symbol of substance and emptiness. And if you like, you can say substance versus emptiness. Either way is fine, just like the yin and yang symbol, we use the word and. That makes sense too. And this is the initial level of understanding. Substance, emptiness. Existence, non-existence. Being, non-being. This is the initial level of understanding, and you see all of them expressed here in the bullets. What about the higher level of understanding? At that higher level, it underscores the importance of emptiness above all. It's good to have the support of all of your spokes, but if the hub of your life is not empty, there is no room for the Tao. You remain as stuck as those who have never heard of the Tao. The wheel doesn't turn. You are going nowhere. So the emptiness of the hub gives the wheel its functionality. Therefore, in general, the emptiness in the center is what makes something useful. And that something can include your life. So this is the symbol that we looked at in the beginning of this chapter. Now, there are many other symbols in the Tao. There is the Bagua. Bagua composed of 2 characters. The first one, literally the number 8, and the second character, Gua. It's contextual. In this case, it's a trigram. And in a different usage, the same character can mean hexagram. So we'll talk about that momentarily. In the middle of the Bagua, you have the yin and yang symbol representing, of course, complementary duality. Now, the curve of the yin and yang means change, movement, and interactions. We'll talk about that more as well. Before we leave this slide, I want to point out something about trigram. Trigram has TRI as the prefix, like triangle. And that's because every symbol, every trigram symbol is composed of 3 lines. And those 3 lines can be unbroken or can be broken in the middle. Lastly, I want to say that there's embedded symbols for Taiji and Wuji. These symbols are hidden in plain sight. So as you're looking at the symbol now, the symbol of the Bagua, you can see the yin and yang. You can see the 8 trigrams around it. So what am I talking about? The Taiji and Wuji are hidden in plain sight. Let me explain. Let's start with the symbol for Wuji. This symbol is just a circle. This is the emptiness, the original essence of the Tao. Ancient sages talk about this. They say, in the unimaginably distant past, there was nothing. There was just the void. The void was a limitless field of infinite potentiality, the birthplace of all things, seemingly empty, but have possibilities to manifest everything. So this is what the ancient sages called 无极, 2 characters, as you can see at the bottom there. First character is without, the second character is limit or extent. So without limit, meaning boundless, limitless. Now, this is why 无极 is depicted as a circle, because the circumference of a circle has no beginning and no end. Going around the circumference, it's infinite. Now, let's move to 太极. The second symbol there, 太极, is the circle plus a dot in the middle. This is because at some point in time, something emerged from nothingness. Something arose out of nothingness. Something came from nothing. That is to say, 无极 gave rise to 太极. Literally, the 2 characters of 太极, the ultimate extent. This is the ancients' way of grappling with the question like, why is there anything at all about existence? Or similar question, why is there something rather than nothing? These questions are the same concerns that scientists have today. Why is there something rather than nothing? Why do we even exist? Of course, the ancient sages did not have quantum physics to tell them about energy fluctuations in the vacuum state, causing particles to pop into existence, apparently from nothingness. The only tool available to the ancients was intuitive reasoning. The reason that since the world existed, they could see it, they could feel it, they could touch it. Since the world existed, something must have come from nothing through a process of the Tao that was mysterious to them. And the 2 characters of 太极 that you see down there, they are the same 2 characters as Tai Chi, what people usually say as Tai Chi. That is the slow movements that you see people practice, perhaps in a park somewhere. Now, why is it Tai Chi instead of Tai Chi? Well, it's an artifact of the older romanization system. It's written as Tai Chi. People pronounce it as Tai Chi, but the romanization system of old always had intended for it to sound like Tai Chi, which is what you see here. I know it's confusing. Many people, including scholars themselves, are hopelessly confused. The next step in this evolution is that the oneness of existence polarized into the 2 complements, yin and yang. Now, line 2 in Tao Te Ching chapter 42 describes this in the simplest possible way. That line just says 1 produces 2. So the 1 is the dot in the middle of Tai Chi. The 2 is the yin and yang representing forces or principles. And there again, it was something that the ancients reasoned through observation. How the 1 became 2 was just as mysterious to them as how something came from nothing, which was the previous stage. But then they looked around. They could see the world was full of life produced from male and female energies. So, because of that, it must be reflective of some overall principle. That is why there's a curve in the middle. It depicts how yin and yang are constantly moving into each other, revolving around, manifesting at the human level as the eternal dance of the male and female energies. This is also where the symbol, this particular symbol, is like a wheel, because the movement is a circular rotation. Again, like a wheel. Finally, so here's a note. The interplay of the duality gave rise to the myriad of things, and that's where we get the trigrams, the 8 trigrams representing different aspects of the world. And that's the Bagua. That's how this is derived. Symbolizing myriad patterns and manifestations of the world arising from the interactions of yin and yang energies. Now, between the 2 and the 8, yin and yang is 2, Bagua is 8. Between the 2, there's a stage in between where the 2 gave rise to the 4. The 4 is sort of like samsara, much more talked about than drawn as a symbol. Sages discuss the 4 in terms of the 4 seasons and the 4 compass directions: north, south, east, and west. Also, the 4 orientations for a human being from our perspective: up, down, left, right. So not quite the same as north, south, east, and west, but still 4. Now, the sages would say they are the way they are because they are the way that the Tao manifests reality, that it did not come from some sort of accidental formation. The 4 has to be the 4. Has to be 4 seasons. There must be 4 compass directions because it is reality. Now, 4 multiplied by 2 gives us 8, and that is the trigram. Now, we say trigram not just because it's made up of 3 lines, but also because 8 is 2 times 2 times 2. Or in other words, 2 multiplied by itself 3 times. Hence the tri in trigram. To extend from that, 易经, the classic of changes, it contains 64 hexagrams. Now, it's the same character, 卦, but translated as hexagrams, because there are 64 of them representing a more detailed view into the manifestations of the world. Every hexagram is composed of 6 lines. Each line can be solid or broken. The world, our society, and life itself all reflect the patterns of existence somewhere in the 64 hexagrams. And hex means 6. Hexagon is a 6-sided shape. When you multiply 2 by itself 6 times, you get 64. The more you delve into the I Ching, the more you can feel the power of the Tao in describing the patterns of life. That's why people use it for divination. It seems to be a universal intelligence that reflects reality and can give you insights. And of course, what I say is that, why do that? If you can accurately understand the I Ching itself, you become a living oracle. You don't even need to do any casting or divination. You just know what's going to happen. So here, looking at this entire slide, I want to point out something obvious. Every stage incorporates the previous stage. The most obvious is the yin and yang symbol inside the Bagua. Not as obvious is Taiji within the yin and yang. It's there. And once you see it, it's also easy to understand the Taiji symbol contains Wuji too, It's just a circle without the dot. In modern astronomy, scientists derive something like the Big Bang Theory by noting the current expansion of the universe and then look back in time, like running the film backwards, to figure out the early universe all the way back to an instant after time zero, the moment of creation. In the ancient Tao, sages go through their version of this mental exercise. The world as it is today is the Bagua. Then they look back in time, all the way back to when nothing existed. So now you can see that there's something much more profound in the symbol of the wheel than just the wheel itself. It actually has so many implications about life, existence, reality, you name it. Now, we are at the top of the hour now, so we need to jump to the summary for today. The summary we have specifically is for what we have talked about, the being, non-being, existence, non-existence, substance, emptiness. The wheel. We know the 30 spokes are the structural support. We know the emptiness in the center of the wheel gives it functionality. Therefore, deriving from this, Laozi advises the king. The advisors and ministers, Your Majesty, are your spokes. You must be receptive, you must be open, you must be empty of self-important conceptions in order to listen to them, in order to rule wisely. We can easily map that to you, but this is so important that I want to make sure that this is the summary for today. You are the main character in the story of your life. You are surrounded by a bunch of spokes. You are the hub, and the spokes is the cast of characters in your life. The most important thing, if I can distill it into one sentence, is keep your heart humble so the Tao can manifest. That's it. And if you think about the wheel with the axle running through it, that is the powerful image. That's a gift to us from Laozi. Our meeting has come to an end, but the journey continues on. Until next time, may the Tao fill you with peace and happiness.